It began with a whisper in a courtroom. A 6-year-old girl stood before a judge and said, "Free my dad, and I'll help you walk again." The room laughed until the impossible started to unfold. What followed wasn't just a legal drama. It was a story of sacrifice, hope, and the quiet kind of miracle that changes lives forever. The courtroom in Fairfax County, Virginia, was modest pews of worn oak, a judge's bench dulled with time, and a single flickering fluorescent light that buzzed softly like an old radio left on too long. Outside, winter whispered against the glass, but inside the air was heavy, unmoved, waiting. Michael Bray sat at the defense table in a navy blue jumpsuit that didn't belong to him. His broad shoulders seemed ill-fitted inside it, like a man misplaced in a world that no longer recognized who he once was. His hands scarred, calloused, and too familiar with both rifles and infant bottles, were folded together, tightly resting on the table, as if they alone were holding him upright. The clerk's voice was flat. Commonwealth of Virginia versus Michael Bray. 1 count of breaking and entering. 1 count of theft of controlled substances. Michael didn't flinch. His face bore no defiance, only weariness, not the kind from lack of sleep, but the kind carved by years of sacrifice, loss, and now shame. From the bench, Judge Amelia Cross adjusted the microphone with steady fingers. She had the air of a woman carved from discipline hair, pulled back into a tight knot robe, pressed to precision, and eyes sharper than any gavel she'd ever dropped. But what truly marked her was the wheelchair. She never acknowledged it, never complained, never pitied. But the metal frame was a silent guardian, always beside her part of the architecture of her courtroom now. Mr. Bray Judge Cross said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "You've waived your right to counsel. Are you prepared to proceed with sentencing?" Michael nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." She examined him for a beat longer than necessary. There was something unsettling about the calm in his eyes. Not indifference, but a kind of exhausted dignity. Then it happened. The heavy door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Heads turned. Some gasped. A little girl stood there framed by the dull winter light. She couldn't have been more than 6. Red dress, white stockings, scuffed shoes. In her arms she clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit whose ears had been chewed by time. She walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, as if the floor itself might vanish beneath her feet. No one stopped her. Not the bailiff. Not the clerk. Not even the air, which seemed to hold its breath. Sophie Michael's voice cracked barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She just walked past him, past the prosecutor's desk, and straight toward the bench. She stopped a few feet in front of Judge Cross, her head tilted back to meet the woman's gaze. The courtroom waited. "Your Honor," Sophie said, her voice soft but clear. "Can I say something?" Amelia looked around, slightly taken aback. "This is highly irregular," she began. "Please," Sophie whispered just one thing. The judge hesitated just long enough for everyone to feel it. Then, with a nod that was almost imperceptible, she said, "Go ahead." Sophie took a breath, held it, then spoke the words that would change everything. "If you free my dad," she said, "I promise. I'll help you walk again." Silence, not the kind of silence that happens naturally. This one crashed into the room, stunning it. Even the buzzing light above seemed to pause. Then came the laughter. It started as a chuckle from the prosecutor. Then the gallery. Even the bailiff smirked. A child's promise, sweet, absurd, ridiculous in the eyes of law and logic. But Amelia Cross didn't laugh. Her lips were pursed unreadable. Her fingers tapped once against the wooden edge of her bench. Her eyes, however, narrowed, not with mockery, but with something else. Something unsettled. because for a split second when the girl had said it, Amelia had felt something in her legs. Nothing dramatic. No tingling, no twitch. Just a phantom sensation like a memory waking up. It was impossible, illogical, but undeniable. "Sophie," she said slowly, "why would you say something like that?" Because the girl replied, "You look like someone who misses dancing." The judge blinked. Just once. And in that one blink, 1,000 things passed behind her eyes. Pain loss, a broken spinal cord, a shattered dream of performing in Swan Lake one last time before the fall. No one had mentioned dancing. Not in years. "How did you?" Amelia began, but Sophie had already turned to her father. "Daddy, it's okay. I told the truth. Now we wait." Michael looked as though his soul had left his body and returned in pieces. He couldn't speak. Judge Cross glanced at the paperwork before her. The law was clear. The crime was real. The confession had been entered, but the moment hung in the air like a scale waiting for her to tip it. She cleared her throat. "This court will reconvene in 30 days, she announced, her voice suddenly unfamiliar to herself. "Sentencing is postponed pending review of the defendant's character, and to allow time for further assessment." The prosecutor's mouth dropped open. What he blurted, "Your Honor." "You can't be serious. I am." Amelia interrupted, eyes still locked on the child. "Consider it a stay of disbelief." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Case adjourned. No one moved. As the room emptied, Sophie reached up and took her father's hand. "See," she whispered. "You just have to believe." And for the first time in years, Michael did. 3 days earlier. Tuesday, 5:42 a.m. The alarm clock didn't ring because it hadn't worked in months. But Michael Bray was already awake. He sat on the edge of the sagging cot in the tiny one-bedroom apartment, lacing up his boots as the first chill of morning bled in through the cracked window. The space was dimly lit, cluttered with old photographs taped to the fridge, and a drawing of a smiling girl with the words, "Daddy's my hero," scrawled in bright red crayon. In the other room, Sophie coughed. It was dry and deep, worse than the day before. Michael's shoulders tightened. He crossed the room, pulled the patchwork curtain aside, and saw her curled on the faded couch, bunny rabbit in hand. Inhaler resting uselessly by her side. She was sweating pale. He knelt beside her and whispered, "Hey, sweet pea." Sophie opened her eyes, weak, but still sparkling. "Hi, Daddy. You didn't sleep much. I dreamed you were flying," she said. "Like a superhero." He smiled faintly. "Those days are long gone, baby girl." Her fingers reached for his. "Can you get more of the blue medicine today?" "The other one hurts." He swallowed hard. "I'll do my best." By noon, Michael had done everything he could. He'd sold his old army knife at a pawn shop on the South End, collected cans for change, even tried to trade the only photo of his wedding day for store credit, but the pharmacy didn't take memories. So with $27 in hand, he returned to Lakeview Pharmacy, a neighborhood store with 2 bright lights and a clerk who'd seen too much. "I need albuterol," he told her. The woman glanced up. "No insurance." "No." She checked the system. "Out-of-pocket price is $93.49. Michael inhaled slowly. Jaw clenched. "I'm a veteran. Navy SEAL. Served 12 years. There has to be a way." "I'm sorry, sir," she said, already turning to the next customer. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the white bottle behind the glass. It wasn't just a medicine. It was the air his daughter couldn't breathe without. He left without a word. By nightfall, desperation had calcified into decision. At 11:27 p.m., Michael returned to the pharmacy, this time wearing a navy jacket too thin for winter, his old dog tags tucked beneath his shirt, and a pair of gloves with holes in the knuckles. No weapon. No threats. Just a man with a mission. He jimmied the back door open with a screwdriver. The alarm was slow. He knew he had 90 seconds before police dispatch. He moved like a ghost muscle memory guiding him through shadow and silence. He found the inhalers. 3 boxes. Grabbed them. Then paused. Next to them sat a bottle of amoxicillin. Sophie's cough had turned deeper, harsher. The voice in his head, the one that had shouted orders across Fallujah rooftops, told him, "Take it. Go. Now." But the second he turned, a flashlight beam exploded behind him. "Don't move." A voice, young, nervous. Michael froze, raised his hand slowly. The inhalers tumbled from his coat. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said calmly, on the ground. Now Michael lowered himself onto the tile floor. Cold, familiar, humbling. The cop cuffed him quickly. Too quickly. He was shaking, probably new to the job. As Michael was being hauled to his feet, the officer noticed the tattoos on his arm faded, intricate symbols inked beneath old scars. One mark stood out, a trident emerging from an eagle's talon. The young officer paused. "You were SEAL?" Michael nodded, exhausted. "A long time ago. Fallujah." Michael met his eyes. "Yeah." A beat passed one veteran to another, even if only in understanding. "Then what the hell are you doing breaking into a pharmacy?" Michael sighed. "Trying to save my daughter." At the station, they didn't throw him in with the others. Detective Laura King, a woman with tired eyes and too many years on the job, sat across from him with a file in hand. She didn't yell, didn't posture. "You're Michael Bray, Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, honorably discharged 2017. Now you're a janitor at the county middle school living in low-income housing. Divorced. Wife passed from leukemia 5 years ago." Michael stared at the table. "I also see multiple requests for VA assistance, most denied due to backlog." Silence. "Michael," she said gently, "why didn't you ask for help?" His voice cracked for the first time. "Because I used to be the guy people called for help." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was holy. It was the kind of silence that only comes when dignity meets rock bottom and refuses to break. By morning, Michael had waived his right to an attorney, pleaded guilty, and accepted his fate. No excuses, no pleas for sympathy. Just a father who'd risked everything for a box of breath. Later, alone in the holding cell, Michael pulled out a small item from inside his sock, a laminated photo of Sophie, as a toddler holding a balloon. Her cheeks dimpled her smile wide. He whispered, "I failed you, baby." But in the photo, she kept smiling, as if to say, "Not yet, Daddy." And then 3 days later, the courtroom doors opened, and she walked in. The wooden ramp creaked under the weight of Amelia Cross's wheelchair as it rolled toward her front door. She had never liked the sound, too raw, too exposed, like a house trying to remember how to breathe. Her home sat at the end of a quiet street in Old Town Alexandria, shaded by a sycamore tree that had outlived 2 owners and a storm that took out most of the block's power lines last fall. The porch light still flickered from that night, but she never replaced it. She didn't expect visitors. Inside the walls were painted ivory, the air filtered and still. Shelves of law books lined one wall like trophies, organized by year and court circuit. Across from them, in stark contrast, hung a single photograph in a polished silver frame. A younger Amelia stood in mid-spin arms, extended, caught in motion on a sunlit stage. She wore a flowing white ballet dress, and her eyes were alive with light. It was the last photo taken before the accident. The day the car struck her was a blur. Siren lights, a scream, not from her throat, but echoing in her bones, and the sterile ceiling of a trauma center spinning above. The spinal cord injury had been called incomplete, which sounded more hopeful than it was. After surgeries and months of therapy, all she was left with was numbness, tremors, and wheels. The woman in the mirror now had no resemblance to the dancer on the wall. Amelia wheeled into the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed like an old secret. She poured herself a glass of water. Though she wouldn't drink much of it, her legs didn't move, but her bladder still worked just fine, and the bathroom was always a small war. But tonight, none of that occupied her mind. It was the little girl. The courtroom replayed in her head like a courtroom drama she never asked to direct. The hush, the girl's red dress, the voice so small, so impossibly sincere. "If you free my dad, I'll help you walk again." Absurd, irrational, ridiculous, and yet, she had felt something. A flicker in her calves, a soft buzzing in her heel that hadn't been there in 3 years. She told no one. That was the rule. No irrational hope. No indulging the ghost of movement. You survive by not imagining the impossible. Amelia closed her eyes, but the girl's words echoed, looping in her mind, like a melody from a half-remembered lullaby. "You look like someone who misses dancing." How could she know no one had spoken that word in this house in over 1,000 days? Not even Amelia. It was banned along with stage limelight and arabesque. She had burned the shoes, locked away the music. She had punished herself for years for still craving something her body had betrayed. But that night, something cracked open. At 2:14 a.m., she rolled into the room she once called the studio. The hardwood was scratched now. Dust hung like veils in the corners. One bar still clung to the far wall, a relic of the past she couldn't bring herself to tear down. She parked herself before the large mirror, its surface dulled by time. She raised her hand, just her hand, and mimicked a motion she hadn't dared in years. It was a port de bras, simple fluid, like a wave. Her wrist moved first, then her fingers traced the shape of grace in the air. Her other arm followed. She imagined music. And in that silence, something inside her fluttered, like a curtain catching wind after being shut too long. She lowered her arms, breath trembling, then laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not hollow, just surprised. The sound of a woman remembering she used to feel. In the morning, she brewed coffee she didn't finish, stared out the window as the sun spilled across the neighborhood, and opened the court transcript from yesterday's hearing. But her eyes didn't stay on the charges. They wandered to the handwritten note clipped by the clerk. Minor child entered the courtroom without summons. Judge allowed statement on record. Defendant's daughter, Sophie Bray. She said the name aloud. Sophie. It felt like saying a secret you hadn't earned yet. That afternoon, she opened her laptop and searched Bray Michael. The database blinked back at her with cold precision. Navy SEAL. 12 years. 2 Bronze Stars. Discharged. Custody awarded after spouse passed. Low-income housing. Janitor. Then she searched Sophie Bray. Elementary school student. No prior issues. Known asthma diagnosis. She closed the file. Her hand hovered over the phone. No, this wasn't appropriate. And yet, she dialed the number listed on the defendant's intake form. It rang twice. Then a small, breathless voice answered. "Hello," Amelia blinked. "Is this Sophie?" A pause. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Judge Cross." Another pause. Then, "Oh, the one I'm helping." Amelia almost dropped the phone. "I was wondering," she said cautiously, "would you like to meet me at the park sometime just to talk?" The girl didn't hesitate. "Can I bring bread for the ducks?" "Yes. I think they'd like that." Sophie giggled. "You can meet Quackers. He only has one eye. I look forward to it." That night, Amelia sat in her living room holding her phone, staring again at the photo of herself mid-dance. She whispered to the woman in the photo, "Maybe, just maybe. We're not finished yet." The wind danced through the trees of Maple Park, tossing golden leaves like confetti across the walking path. It was the kind of crisp Virginia morning that seemed to hold its breath between seasons, where the sun was warm, but the shadows still held winter. Judge Amelia Cross sat quietly near the edge of the pond, in her wheelchair, her hands folded neatly over her lap. A burgundy scarf loosely knotted at the neck fluttered gently in the breeze. She had arrived 15 minutes early. Old habits. A pair of ducks glided lazily across the water. One of them, true to Sophie's word, was missing an eye. A faint giggle echoed down the path. Amelia turned. Sophie came running around the corner in her red jacket, a small paper bag clutched in her hand, and her bunny rabbit stuffed under one arm. Behind her, a cautious Michael followed his posture, tight, protective. He looked thinner than he had in the courtroom, hollowed out by the weight of decisions no parent should ever have to make. Sophie sprinted up to Amelia, completely ignoring the formality of adult interaction. "You came," she beamed. "I said I would," Amelia replied, her tone softer than she expected. Michael arrived seconds later, nodding curtly. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Please," she said. "Out here, I'm just Amelia." He hesitated. "Amelia." Sophie plopped down beside the judge and opened the paper bag. Inside were 3 crumbling slices of bread. She began breaking them into small pieces and tossing them to the ducks with expert precision. "They come every morning," she said, "even when no one's here." "They wait." Amelia raised a brow. "Why do you think that is?" "Because they believe someone will remember." The words hung in the air. Michael sat down on a nearby bench, arms crossed, scanning the park as if it were a battlefield. Amelia could feel his eyes drifting between her wheelchair and Sophie's light steps. "How long has she had asthma?" she asked gently. "Since she was 2. The cold makes it worse." "And the medicine too expensive," he said simply, "especially after the VA stopped responding. I used to think help was just a matter of asking. Turns out, pride's cheaper." She didn't respond, but her gaze lingered on him longer than necessary. There was strength in the man, clearly. But there was shame, too. Not the kind born from wrongdoing, but from the ache of not being able to protect what matters most. Sophie waved her arms suddenly. "Dance with me, Amelia," the judge blinked. "I can't exactly, not with your legs. With your hands." Sophie stood in front of her, raised her arms, and began moving them in slow, graceful arcs, wide, flowing gestures that mimicked ballet, but felt more like magic. "Come on," she urged like this. Amelia hesitated. Then tentatively she raised her hands and mirrored Sophie's movements. Her wrists circled her fingers, opened like petals. She remembered these shapes. They were buried deep, but not gone. Sophie clapped. "See, you do remember dancing." Michael watched from the bench, stunned. The moment was absurd, beautiful, strange. But in that absurdity was something sacred. Amelia laughed. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't forced. It was real. The first laugh she'd felt ripple through her chest in years. Sophie twirled, stumbled slightly, then collapsed into giggles. "I call it hand ballet," she said. "No toes required." Amelia reached forward and tucked a stray lock of hair behind the girl's ear. "You're remarkable, you know that." Sophie shrugged. "Daddy says I'm stubborn. But I think that's what miracles need." Later, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Michael walked Sophie back toward their building. Amelia wheeled beside them for a stretch, before pausing at the path's split. "I used to come here," she said quietly. "Before the accident, I'd bring a speaker, lay in the grass, dance until sunset." Michael looked at her surprised. "You were a dancer, almost professionally," she said, "until one rainy night and a distracted driver made other plans." He nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry." "I was angry for a long time," she admitted. "At fate, at life, at God, maybe. Then I got good at being numb. It's easier being a machine. Michael let out a dry laugh. "You sound like me." She turned to him. "But Sophie, she doesn't know the rules of being broken yet. That's what makes her dangerous." He smiled faintly. "She's got her mother's heart." Allwood believed healing wasn't just about medicine. Amelia took a breath. "I delayed sentencing for 30 days. I know. If I were to consider leniency, I need to believe in something beyond the letter of the law." Michael stared at her, weary but unflinching. "What do you believe in?" She didn't answer. But as Sophie turned back and waved her silhouette framed by amber light, Amelia whispered, "I think I'm starting to remember." That night, back at her house, Amelia rolled into the dim hallway and paused at the closet door. She hadn't opened it in years. She turned the knob. Inside, covered in dust, and tucked in a box labeled Amelia's, things was a pair of worn satin point shoes. She lifted them gently, as if touching a sleeping memory. She held them to her chest and closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, she cried. Not from pain, but from remembering what it felt like to hope. The nights had grown longer. Inside apartment 3B, the heater clanked like an old soldier trying to march through arthritis, and the wind pushed against the windows as though the world outside was trying to break in. Michael Bray stood in the kitchen staring at the same cracked coffee mug he'd been using for years. The same handle, same chip near the rim. Except now, even the familiar felt fragile. From the living room came the sound of Sophie humming to herself, off-key but sweet, while she colored in her sketchbook. He caught glimpses of her through the doorway, tongue slightly out, brows furrowed bunny rabbit balanced beside her like a silent assistant. He wanted to freeze that moment, trap it in amber. But time didn't care about fathers with broken bank accounts and criminal charges. The 30 days granted by Judge Cross were slipping by like sand through tired fingers. He took a sip of cold coffee, then moved to the cabinet and pulled down a small tin. Inside, buried beneath receipts, was a worn photograph of his wife, Emily. It had been taken on the day Sophie was born. Her hair was a mess, her eyes swollen, but she was smiling like she'd just discovered a secret no one else knew. Michael touched the edge of the photo. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. He sat at the kitchen table and stared into nothing for a long while. Later that night, after tucking Sophie in and kissing her forehead, he returned to the living room and opened his old footlocker. The metallic click of the latches brought back memories that tasted like desert sand and adrenaline. Inside, folded neatly beneath a faded SEAL team patch and a Bible with water-warped pages, was his uniform. He hadn't worn it in years. He ran his fingers over the fabric. This was the suit he'd worn in Fallujah when he'd carried a 12-year-old boy out of a collapsed building under sniper fire, when he'd lost 2 brothers on a rooftop extraction, when he'd stared down the barrel of mortality more times than he cared to count. He used to believe courage was about muscle and reflex, but now courage looked different. Courage was making pancakes when you had no eggs. It was holding your daughter's inhaler in one hand and an overdue bill in the other. It was sitting in a courtroom, wearing a jumpsuit, praying a 6-year-old's faith could bend the laws of man and nature. He pulled out the metal silver star. It caught the light dimly. They had given it to him after his last tour. Said it was for gallantry. He had almost laughed. What did gallantry matter now? The pharmacy didn't care about medals. Neither did the judge. Neither did asthma. Or maybe one judge did. He thought of Amelia Cross, her steady gaze, her hesitation when Sophie spoke, and most of all, her silence. Silence meant something. He replaced the medal and closed the footlocker with a soft thud. At 2:38 a.m., Michael stood alone in the small bathroom, staring into the mirror. His reflection was both familiar and foreign. The long, unshaven stubble. The eyes that looked like they hadn't rested since the war. The weight of 1,000 unspoken worries settled beneath them. He turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on his face. Then he looked at his own eyes and said aloud, like a man issuing orders to himself, "Don't let her down." The next morning, Sophie woke early. Her cough was lighter, but still there. She padded into the kitchen in fuzzy socks and climbed onto the chair across from Michael. He had made oatmeal thin but warm. "Can we go back to the park today?" she asked between spoonfuls. "Of course," he said. "Do you think Amelia will come?" Michael paused. "Maybe." Sophie grinned. "She's practicing." "I can tell." "Practicing what?" "Walking," she said, simply as if the answer was obvious. "You can feel it when someone wants to do something brave." Michael studied his daughter, marveling at how someone so small could carry so much certainty. He envied it. "Daddy," she said suddenly. "Serious, are you scared?" Michael didn't answer right away. Then he set down his spoon and said, "Yes." Her eyes widened. "But you were a soldier." "I was. And I've been scared a lot of times. But this is different." "Why? Because this time I'm not scared for me. I'm scared of what happens to you, if this doesn't work." Sophie reached across the table and grabbed his hand. "It's going to work," she whispered. "Because I believe it." That night, Michael stood at the window watching the city breathe. Lights flickered on across other buildings. Somewhere, a siren wailed. A dog barked. The world moved on. But for him, time had become a slow march toward a verdict. He picked up Emily's photo again and stared at it. "You always believed in miracles," he said. "And I thought you were naive." He chuckled softly, sadly. "Maybe I was wrong." Then voice lower to the night itself. "If there's anything left out there, God, fate, justice, I'm asking you now. Not for me. For her. Just give her a chance to stay a little girl a while longer." He tucked the photo back inside. The tin turned off the light and sat beside Sophie's bed for a long time, listening to the rhythm of her breath. And in the quiet, beneath the weight of fear, something stirred. A seed of hope. Small, but growing. Judge Amelia Cross awoke before sunrise. That in itself was unusual. For the past 3 years, mornings had been a ritual of resistance, snoozed alarms, reluctant movement, the dragging weight of another day that promised nothing but repetition. But today something was different. She felt lighter. Not physically, though there was something subtle in her core, a sense of energy that hadn't been there before. But it was her mind that had shifted, as if a fog had lifted, as if someone had quietly opened a window inside her soul and let fresh air in. She sat up in bed and looked down at her legs. Still, unmoving. Of course. Yet she didn't feel the same despair that usually followed. Instead, she whispered, "Maybe not today. But maybe one day." In the kitchen, she brewed coffee she didn't need just for the smell. The scent of roasted beans filled the air like a familiar song. She used to associate it with late-night case reviews and long court sessions. Lately, it had smelled like loneliness. Today, it smelled like movement. She rolled into the sunroom and opened the blinds. Morning light spilled in, painting long golden slats across the hardwood floor. Dust danced in the beams, like forgotten memories stirring. She reached for the ballet shoes she'd retrieved days ago and held them in her lap. Then on impulse, she placed them on the floor, facing her, as if waiting. At 10:15 a.m., she arrived at Riverside Rehabilitation Center, the place she'd visited exactly 11 times over the past 3 years. Each visit ending in the same verdict: no progress, no sensation, no change. But today, when the receptionist looked up and blinked in surprise, Amelia simply said, "I'd like to restart my therapy." She was taken into a small room where light poured through tall windows and mirrored panels lined the walls. The scent of eucalyptus lingered, mingling with the faint notes of chlorine from the hydrotherapy pool down the hall. Her physical therapist, Dr. William Harrison, entered with his usual brisk professionalism. Mid-40s glasses always slipping down his nose, and a tone sharpened by years of impossible cases. He stopped mid-step when he saw her. "I wasn't expecting you, Judge Cross." "Neither was I," she replied. Dr. Harrison flipped through her chart, then closed it with a sigh. "Forgive me, but what's prompted this sudden interest? Last time we spoke, you said you were done chasing ghosts." She straightened her spine. "I had. A conversation with someone." He raised an eyebrow. "A doctor. 6-year-old. He chuckled. "Interesting credentials." She reminded me what it felt like to believe in something. Dr. Harrison studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Hope can be a dangerous drug. It raises expectations the body can't meet." Amelia nodded. "Maybe. But hopelessness is a slow death. I've been living it." That silenced him. The first session was brutal. Amelia's muscles, long unused, trembled at the smallest resistance. Her core ached from the effort to sit straight for more than 15 minutes without support. Sweat clung to her collarbone. Her arms cramped. Her breath caught in frustration. But she didn't stop. Not once. Afterwards, she collapsed into her chair, every part of her screaming. Dr. Harrison handed her a towel and said quietly, "You've still got fight in you." She looked up. "I never lost it. I just forgot where I put it." That evening back at home, she sat in her sunroom watching the day slip into dusk. Sophie and Michael had visited the park again. She'd seen them from her car window on the way back from the center. The girl twirled near the pond, feeding ducks, as her father stood nearby, arms folded, protective but soft. There was something in the way he watched his daughter, as if he were guarding not just her body, but her wonder. Amelia envied that. Not the protection. The wonder. She wheeled into her study and opened her laptop. The screen lit up with a familiar notification. Unread emails, court memos, legal updates. She ignored them. Instead, she opened a blank document and began to type just a stream of thoughts. She hadn't journaled since before the accident. It felt foreign, vulnerable. But the words came. "Today I moved. Not my legs. Not yet. But something else. Something deeper. A muscle I thought was dead stirred awake, not because a doctor told me it could, but because a child believed it would. Is it foolish, maybe? But I've lived 3 years by the book, and the book never brought me back to life." She stopped typing and stared at the blinking cursor. Then she added, "Maybe it's time to write a new story." The next morning, Dr. Harrison ran a series of baseline tests, reflex hammers, vibration probes, pressure points. Halfway through, he paused. "Judge Cross, I'm getting slight activity on the right foot." She stared at him. "That's not possible. It's minimal. Could be nerve memory or early reconnection. But it's something." He didn't smile. He was too cautious for that. But she saw it, the flicker in his eyes. The quiet thrill of a scientist facing a mystery. Amelia left the center in silence. As she wheeled herself out to the parking lot, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Sophie, me and Daddy are going to the park today again. I saved you a piece of muffin in case you come. The ducks will share." Amelia smiled. She typed back, "Tell Quackers I'll be there. And I'm bringing my own crumbs this time." That night, she dreamt of dancing. Not on a stage, not in front of an audience, just on a field, barefoot, under the stars. And when she awoke, her legs still wouldn't move, but her heart did. And that was a start. The sky over Virginia that afternoon was the color of steel, thick, low-hanging clouds rolling in like waves preparing to crash. The local weather station issued warnings, but Maple Park remained quiet. The wind only a whisper. At exactly 4:00 p.m., like every day since the courtroom, Sophie tugged gently at her father's sleeve. "Time to go," she said, voice bright. Michael looked at the gathering clouds. "Might rain." Sophie nodded. "I know. But we promised." Michael hesitated. He'd been tracking the storm on his phone all day. The radar map looked ugly, red splotches bleeding across the county line. But when he looked down into Sophie's eyes, there was no fear. Only conviction. A child's promise was never just words. By the time they arrived, the wind had picked up. Leaves scattered like startled birds, and the ducks had retreated to the far side of the pond. Michael zipped Sophie's red jacket up to her chin. 10 minutes. No more. Deal, she grinned. They waited under the covered gazebo at the edge of the path. Sophie clutched a fresh muffin in her hands wrapped in wax paper, the good kind with blueberries. She insisted on bringing one for Amelia just in case she shows up. And somehow, as if the universe hadn't yet decided what kind of story it wanted to tell, Amelia Cross appeared. Wrapped in a long dark coat, wheeling herself slowly up the incline, face turned into the wind eyes scanning until they found them. "You came," Sophie beamed. "I did," Amelia said, cheeks flushed from the cold. Michael moved quickly, placing himself between the descending clouds and the two women. "This weather's turning bad fast." "I won't stay long," Amelia replied. "I just didn't want to miss today." Sophie pulled out the muffin. "Blueberries." "The brave kind," Amelia laughed, then coughed from the cold air. "Thank you." The first drops of rain began to fall soft, scattered tapping on the gazebo roof, like fingers drumming a warning. "We should go," Michael said. "Now." But Sophie had already stepped out into the open, arms wide, face lifted. "Don't worry, Daddy. We can dance in the rain." Michael moved to grab her, but Amelia stopped him. "Wait." Sophie twirled slowly, letting the rain hit her cheeks. She reached out one hand to Amelia. "Come on, just your hands." Like before. Amelia hesitated. The rain fell harder now, blurring the edges of the park into watercolor. Then slowly she wheeled forward, leaving the shelter, letting the cold drops soak into her coat, her scarf, her hair. She lifted her arms. And they danced. Two people who couldn't dance, dancing anyway. Michael stood frozen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Then it happened. A screech. Metal on pavement. The wheelchair wheel clipped a small stone on the path. The ground sloped slightly wet now from the rain. Amelia's right wheel slipped. She tipped. Michael shouted, lunged too late. The judge fell hard. Her head struck the cobblestone edge with a sickening crack. Sophie screamed. Michael was at her side in seconds. "Amelia, stay. With me." She didn't respond. Her eyes were half-lidded, mouth slightly open. Blood trickled from behind her ear. Michael pressed his fingers to her neck. A pulse. Faint. But there. "Sophie, call 911. Use my phone." His voice was shaking. The girl, pale and wide-eyed, grabbed the phone from his coat pocket with trembling fingers. She knew the numbers. She had them memorized, just like Daddy had taught her. 911. What's your emergency?" "My friend fell. She hit her head. She's not waking up." Her voice broke, and she just started dancing again. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. It felt like 70. Michael rode in the back, gripping Amelia's hand, as paramedics worked around him. One of them whispered, "We've got blunt head trauma, possible concussion, unresponsive." As the sirens wailed toward the hospital, Sophie sat beside the driver, clinging to the stuffed rabbit like it was an oxygen tank. Rain streaked across the window beside her, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. She was remembering the way Amelia's hands had moved just seconds before the fall, graceful, free, fearless. At the hospital, bright white swallowed everything. Michael paced, Sophie sat motionless. A nurse came out. "We've stabilized her. She's unconscious. CT scan shows a cerebral contusion. No swelling yet. But we're monitoring closely." "Will she wake up?" Michael asked. The nurse hesitated. "We don't know." 3 hours later, Prosecutor Ryan Cole entered the waiting room, rain still clinging to his coat. He looked around, confused. "I saw the news alert." "Judge Cross." "She's in ICU." Michael didn't answer. Ryan spotted Sophie and walked over slowly. "Hey, are you okay?" Sophie looked up, eyes glassy. I tried to catch her. "But I'm too small." Ryan knelt beside her. "You're not too small. You're the reason she came out there at all." Then he turned to Michael. "I owe you both an apology," he said. "I thought this was a circus, a manipulation. But now—" He trailed off. Michael's voice was quiet. "Now it's just a hospital room and a little girl who still believes in miracles." Ryan stared through the glass toward the ICU, and for the first time in his career, he had nothing legal to say. Inside the ICU machines beeped in rhythm. Amelia lay still, pale, fragile. But beneath the silence, something lingered. A promise, a whisper, a trace of music only a child could hear. The fluorescent lights of Fairfax General Hospital burned bright, but everything else felt dim. Outside the ICU, Michael sat on a plastic chair that had long ago given up on comfort. His elbows rested on his knees, fingers locked, eyes staring through the observation window at the still figure inside. Judge Amelia Cross lay motionless, tubes in her arm, a heart monitor pulsing in slow, regular beats. Her face was pale, bruised at the temple, her once proud posture now reduced to the vulnerability of the unconscious. Sophie had cried herself to sleep 2 hours earlier, curled on a bench beside him, Bunny clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Her breathing now was deep, steady, more peaceful than he felt she deserved after what she had witnessed. And yet, she was the strongest person in the room. Michael leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. He wasn't a religious man, not really. But in the stillness, he mouthed words he hadn't said since Iraq. "Please, just give her back." The doors to the waiting area hissed open. Prosecutor Ryan Cole walked in, slowly. Suit jacket folded over his arm tie loosened. His normally slick hair was damp with rain, and his expression was stripped of any courtroom bravado. Michael sat up. Ryan nodded in greeting, then looked toward the window. "Any change?" Michael shook his head. "She's stable, but hasn't woken up." Ryan took a long breath, then sat down across from him. There was a silence between them. Heavy. Real. "I've been thinking about the hearing," Ryan finally said. "About that little girl walking in and making a promise that stopped the whole room." Michael glanced at him cautious. "You think it was staged?" Ryan shook his head. "I think it was real. And I think—" I laughed, because I didn't know what else to do when the world stopped making sense. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. I read the incident report. "You didn't run. You didn't resist. You even apologized while they cuffed you." "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," Michael replied. "I just needed my daughter to breathe." Ryan looked at him for a long moment. "You know, I used to believe that the law was clean, logical, fair. But fair doesn't always mean just." Michael's jaw tightened. "No offense, counselor, but that's a realization you could have come to a bit earlier." Ryan didn't flinch. "You're right." The beep of the heart monitor behind the glass was the only sound for a while. Then Ryan said, "There's a statute under Virginia Code, Section 1922-303. It allows for a deferred disposition in certain misdemeanor cases, especially when the welfare of a minor is involved." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can petition the court to drop the charges if you agree to community service, continued parenting classes, and therapy. but only if Judge Cross wakes up to approve it. Michael let out a bitter laugh. So everything still hinges on her. Yes, Ryan said, and maybe on your daughter. 2 hours later, the nurse gently tapped Michael's shoulder. Someone's requesting to see the patient. Michael frowned. She's not allowed visitors outside family. The nurse tilted her head. I think you'll want to make an exception. Sophie stood behind her, awake, composed, and holding a small folded piece of paper in her hand. In the ICU, the machines beeped steadily. The room smelled like antiseptic and unanswered prayers. Sophie stood on a stool beside the bed, reaching Amelia's hand. Her fingers were small, but they wrapped around the judge's palm with gentle certainty. Michael stood by the door watching. The nurse monitored quietly from the corner. Sophie leaned in, voice soft, as if sharing a bedtime secret. Hi, Amelia. It's me. She lifted the folded paper and placed it on the blanket. I drew this for you. It's us dancing. You don't have your wheelchair in the picture. And Daddy says that's okay, 'cause sometimes pictures show what we believe, not just what we see. She squeezed Amelia's hand. I don't know how to fix grown-up things. But I think maybe your heart just got scared, like your legs forgot how to trust you. She paused, then whispered the same words she said in court. I promised I'd help you walk again, and I still mean it. The room was still, then barely visible a flutter in Amelia's fingertips. Michael stepped forward. Nurse, I see it, the nurse said, eyes wide. Another twitch. Then, a slight turn of her head. Sophie gasped. Amelia, the judge's eyelids shifted, blinked once, slowly. Her lips parted dry and heavy. Hey, dancer, she rasped. Sophie burst into tears, half joy, half relief, and laid her head on the blanket. Michael's knees buckled as he gripped the edge of the bed. Dr. Harrison rushed in moments later, called by the monitors. After a quick exam, he looked up in astonishment. She's responding. This is remarkable. Amelia's eyes opened again a little clearer. She turned toward Sophie. You kept your promise. Sophie nodded fiercely. You did too. In the hallway, Ryan Cole stood frozen, watching through the glass. He took out his phone. Then, for the first time in his career, he added a handwritten note at the bottom of a legal motion. This case is no longer about theft. It's about grace. The ICU hallway smelled of antiseptic and uncertainty. Even though Judge Amelia Cross had opened her eyes just hours earlier, she had since slipped into a deep, quiet stillness again, conscious but far away, like someone standing just behind a locked door, unsure whether to knock or turn the handle. Michael stood by the window, arms folded, staring out at the rain-slicked pavement below. A nurse moved past him silently. Machines beeped behind the glass, steady but distant. In the corner of the waiting room, Sophie sat, very still. She hadn't spoken much since that moment when Amelia whispered, You kept your promise. But something about the silence afterward had weighed on her little shoulders, as if she believed she had only brought Amelia halfway back, and it was now her job to finish what she started. She stood, walked over to her father, and tugged his sleeve. I want to go back in, she said. Michael looked down. Sweetheart, the doctors say she's resting. She's not sleeping, Sophie interrupted. She's waiting. Michael crouched, waiting for what Sophie's voice was quiet but steady, for someone to tell her it's okay to come all the way back. 5 minutes later, Sophie stood at the threshold of room 207. Inside, Judge Cross lay as before, head propped on a pillow skin, pale but warm. Eyes shut. Monitors blinking in steady rhythm. A nurse sat beside the bed chart in hand. Only a few minutes, sweetie, she said gently. Don't touch any equipment, okay? Sophie nodded and stepped inside. Michael stayed behind the glass. It was quiet. Not an uncomfortable quiet, but the kind of quiet that makes you want to breathe softer. Sophie dragged the small wooden stool to the side of the bed. She climbed up, carefully settling, so her face was level with Amelia's. She took a breath, then reached out and gently held the judge's hand, thin, cold fingers resting in her own. "Hi again," she whispered. "It's okay. I know it's hard to come back. When my mommy died, I thought about going away too. Not to heaven. Just away. Where people don't cry or need you to be brave." Her thumb traced small circles across Amelia's knuckles, but I stayed because Daddy needed me, and the ducks, and you. She pulled out a folded paper from her jacket, another drawing. She unfolded it slowly, smoothing it on the blanket. Crayon lines showed two women, one in a wheelchair, one standing. Both were smiling. Above them was a banner that read, "We danced anyway." "You said you didn't remember how to hope," Sophie said. "That's okay. I can hold the hope for both of us. Until you're ready." She looked up at Amelia's face, still motionless. Sophie took a shaky breath and leaned closer. "You're not broken," she said. "You're just scared. That's what happens when big people fall down inside." Then, with the gentleness of a lullaby, she whispered something no one else heard. "Come back. Please. I'm still waiting to see you stand." A tear slipped down Sophie's cheek and landed softly on the back of Amelia's hand, and then something shifted. At first it was just a twitch, so small it could have been a muscle spasm. But Sophie saw it. She knew the difference. Amelia's fingers curled slightly around the girl's. Then her eyelids flickered. Her lips parted. And in the softest voice, rough with disuse, "Still waiting," Sophie smiled through tears. "Always." The heart monitor picked up pace. The nurse looked up sharply from her station, then ran out into the hallway. Michael stepped back as she rushed past. "She's responding again. More than before." He was through the door in 2 seconds. Inside, Amelia turned her head towards Sophie, eyes blinking slowly. Michael's breath caught. She saw him. Really saw him. Her voice was hoarse but clearer now. "I heard everything." Michael swallowed hard. "We didn't know if you were still in there." "I was," she whispered. "I was listening." To her. Her hand squeezed Sophie's. To all of it. Dr. Harrison arrived minutes later, followed by 2 residents. He began tests, quickly. Reflexes, eye-tracking pupil dilation. Then came the lower extremity check. "Judge Cross," he said gently, "I'm going to apply slight pressure to the soles of your feet. If you feel anything, let me know." She nodded weakly. The room held its breath. He pressed. For 2 seconds, nothing. Then I felt that Amelia whispered. Dr. Harrison's eyes snapped to hers. "Are you sure?" She blinked. "Like pins and needles." He repeated the test. She felt it again, this time on both feet. Then slowly, with visible strain, Amelia attempted to move her right toe. It twitched. Barely. But it moved. Dr. Harrison turned to Michael, stunned. "This is highly unusual. It shouldn't be possible so soon after trauma, and certainly not after 3 years of full lower limb paralysis." Michael's voice was low, steady. "But it is." The doctor nodded slowly. "It is." Back in the waiting room, Sophie sat on her father's lap, sipping apple juice from a paper cup. Through the glass, she watched Amelia sleep peacefully. Not the vacant stillness from before, but the deep healing kind. The kind that follows a decision to come back. "She's going to be okay," Sophie whispered. Michael looked down at her. "How do you know?" "Because I heard her heart," she said simply. "And it's awake now." He kissed the top of her head, arms wrapped tight around her. And for the first time in weeks, He let himself believe. The world returned to Amelia Cross, one sound at a time. First, the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. Then the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the whisper of an air vent. And somewhere, near, but soft, a child's humming. Off-key, gentle, familiar. She opened her eyes. Light poured in like a wave, bright and warm, flooding senses long dimmed. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. The white ceiling, the sterile scent, the gentle pressure of cotton against her skin. Then the pain. A dull throb behind her left ear, as if someone had placed a stone inside her skull. She shifted slightly instinctively, and froze. She felt it. Her legs. Not fully, not strongly, but the sensation was there. A dull awareness. A spark in a room she thought had gone dark forever. A lump formed in her throat. I'm still here. And then, just as her breath started to shake, Amelia. The voice was tiny, clear, impossible not to recognize. She turned her head slowly, carefully, and saw Sophie, seated at her bedside legs, dangling off the chair bunny rabbit, in lap, watching her with the patience only children and angels seemed to possess. You came back, Sophie whispered, like a secret she'd been keeping safe for days. Amelia's lips parted. Her voice was hoarse. I couldn't miss our dance recital. Sophie beamed. The door opened, and Michael stepped in. His face, haggard from sleepless nights, lit up the moment their eyes met. She's awake, he asked, voice tight with disbelief. Sophie nodded proudly. Told you. Michael approached slowly, uncertain whether to speak or kneel or cry. Amelia looked at him, and for a long moment they didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I remember everything she said softly. The park. The rain. Your voice. Her voice. Michael's eyes glistened. We weren't sure if you'd come back. I wasn't either, she replied. But then she held my hand, and she didn't ask me to walk. She just asked me to hope. Sophie reached out and gently placed Amelia's hand back into her own. You promised, she said. And you're almost there. Dr. Harrison arrived within the hour, followed by 2 residents and a physical therapist. The room turned clinical again, filled with gentle taps, lights tests. But nothing could dull the spark that had returned to Amelia's face. When Harrison pressed the bottom of her foot, she gasped. That's sharp. He looked up, stunned. You felt that? Like a tack, she said, wincing. Can you try to move your toes again? Amelia focused, her brow furrowed. She closed her eyes and summoned every ounce of concentration. And then, like petals twitching in a spring breeze, her right toes moved. Small, delicate, but real. The entire room stilled. One resident choked on a breath. Dr. Harrison turned away and scribbled on his clipboard too quickly, an attempt perhaps to hide emotion not meant for this setting. This level of neurological response, after both trauma and chronic paralysis, he murmured. It's unheard of. Michael leaned in. But it's happening. The doctor nodded. It's happening. Amelia laughed, light, breathless, half disbelief, half joy. Does this mean I'm not just a court exhibit anymore? Harrison smiled. It means you're rewriting your prognosis. Later that afternoon, with the hospital room quiet again, Amelia asked for a mirror. The nurse hesitated. It might be a little early. I'm not asking to check my makeup, she said. I need to see myself. The nurse handed her a small handheld mirror. Amelia raised it slowly, eyes locking with her reflection. What stared back at her wasn't a judge or a patient. It was a woman with bruises, tangled hair, and swollen lips. But the eyes, they were awake, alive, even glowing. She smiled faintly. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't see someone broken. She saw someone healing. That evening, Michael sat by her bed, as Sophie napped in the recliner near the window. They spoke in hushed tones, the room bathed in soft amber light from the setting sun. "You changed my mind about the law," Amelia said. Michael raised an eyebrow. "How's that? I used to think justice was black and white. Rules, precedent, discipline." She paused. "But justice is also mercy, humanity. It's that little girl sleeping by the window," he smiled. "She does have a way of rearranging the world." Amelia nodded. "I postponed your sentencing. I gave us 30 days. We're past halfway," he said, "and I still have no idea what's going to happen." "I do," she whispered. Their eyes met. "I'm going to walk back into that courtroom on my own 2 feet." Michael blinked. "You really think I don't think?" she interrupted. "I know." A beat. He smiled. "Then I guess we all have promises to keep." That night, long after Michael had left, and Sophie had been carried home asleep in her father's arms, Amelia remained awake. The nurse came in to check vitals and found her sitting upright, fingers tracing the outline of her legs beneath the blanket. "Can I help you with something?" "Judge Cross." Amelia looked up. "Yes," she said. "I'd like to start physical therapy first thing tomorrow morning." "Of course." "Oh, and one more thing." "Yes. Don't call me Judge in here." The nurse smiled. "What should I call you then?" Amelia looked toward the window, where the moonlight traced silver outlines across the room. "Call me Amelia." The courthouse steps had never felt this sacred. At 9:02 a.m., people began arriving, some in business suits, others in jeans and work boots, all drawn by whispers that had traveled through town like wildfire. "She's walking." They didn't believe it at first. But now, as the cold January air wrapped itself around the sandstone columns of the Fairfax County Courthouse, the impossible seemed closer than ever. Inside the courtroom buzzed. Spectators filled every pew. School teachers, shop owners, war veterans in ball caps bearing old unit patches. Even a news crew had set up discreetly in the back. Everyone was waiting. At the defense table, Michael Bray sat in his best clothes, pressed slacks, a second-hand blazer, and a tie. Sophie insisted he wear, even though it choked him half to death. He held her hand under the table. Sophie, in her red dress and white stockings, kicked her legs nervously as she clutched her bunny rabbit tight. "Will she really walk in?" she whispered. Michael smiled gently. "If she's anything like you, then yes." The bailiff's voice broke the tension. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Amelia Cross." A rustle swept the room. People stood instinctively, but many turned toward the doors, expecting the usual wheelchair, the soft rolling sound of wheels on tile. Instead, there was only silence. Then the double doors opened, and Amelia Cross stepped inside, on her own 2 feet. She moved slowly each step, careful but deliberate. She used a cane, slender, black, elegant, but it was clear she was walking. Really walking. Gasps rippled across the room. The bailiff's hand dropped from his clipboard. The court reporter forgot to type. One of the veterans stood straighter, tears in his eyes. Amelia's robe swayed gently as she approached the bench. Her chin was lifted, her spine proud, her face radiant with something deeper than victory peace. She reached the judge's bench, paused, then turned around to face the court. People didn't sit until she motioned softly with her hand. Only then did the gavel come down. Court is now in session. Prosecutor Ryan Cole stood first. "Your Honor," he said. Clearing his throat, the Commonwealth moves to revisit sentencing under the compassionate guidelines of Virginia Statute 19-2-303, citing extraordinary circumstances and new character evidence. Amelia nodded. "Proceed." Ryan turned to face the room. Michael Bray. He served this country for 12 years as a Navy SEAL. He risked his life in places most of us only see on television. He returned home, became a father, and tried to raise his daughter alone. He paused. 3 weeks ago, he committed a crime. He broke into a pharmacy to steal medication. But he didn't run. He didn't hide. He turned himself in and asked for no special treatment. He stood ready to pay the price. Ryan looked toward Michael. But that's not why we're here today. He turned back to the judge. We're here because a little girl walked into this courtroom and made a promise that most of us laughed at. She said, "Free my dad and I'll help you walk again." He let the words hang in the air. Some of us forgot that the law is more than rules. It's about people. It's about grace. He stepped back. The prosecution recommends full dismissal of charges with court-mandated community service in lieu of sentencing. Amelia absorbed every word. Then she turned to Michael. "Mr. Bray, please rise." Michael stood holding Sophie's hand tightly. She looked at him for a long moment, longer than any sentencing pause he had ever witnessed. Not to intimidate, but to honor. "Mr. Bray," she said, voice clear, strong, "you were trained to act without hesitation in the face of danger. You served with distinction. You returned home not as a hero in uniform, but as something harder, a single father, with no medals, for bedtime stories, and no benefits for emergencies." Michael's eyes stung. She continued, "You broke the law, but you did so in the name of love. And while that doesn't excuse your actions, it does illuminate your heart." She looked toward Sophie. "Your daughter didn't just plead your case, she healed mine." Sophie smiled wide and teary-eyed. Amelia turned back to Michael. "In the eyes of the law, justice is balance. But in the eyes of the heart, justice is restoration. Today, I choose both." She reached for the gavel. "I hereby dismiss all charges against Michael Bray. No fine, no jail time. But I do assign one mandatory sentence: community mentorship for at-risk youth and disabled veterans, under the supervision of this court." The gavel dropped. Case dismissed. Applause erupted. Not wild, not chaotic, but sacred. The kind that comes when something broken has been made whole again. Outside under the January sun, Amelia stepped onto the courthouse steps, flanked by Michael and Sophie. Sophie slipped her hand into the judge's. "You did it," the girl whispered. Amelia squeezed back. "We did it." Reporters shouted questions, but no one answered. Some things weren't for headlines. Some things were just for hearts. That night, back at Maple Park, the three of them returned to the pond. Quackers, the one-eyed duck, waddled near. Amelia laughed as Sophie tossed crumbs into the water. Michael brought out a portable speaker. Soft music began to play, classical gentle, with a hint of something joyful. Amelia stood. Sophie ran to her side, lifted her arms, and began her now familiar hand ballet. Amelia followed, matching each movement. Their hands danced in the golden light. And then slowly, hesitantly, Amelia stepped forward. One step, then another. A spin, small but real. Michael watched them, hand over his heart, tears burning his eyes. Not because of what he saw, but because of what he finally believed. The wind at Maple Park had a different texture now. It still rustled the same old sycamores, still carried the earthy scent of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke. But today it wasn't heavy. It didn't push or press. It simply accompanied. Amelia Cross stood at the edge of the pond. No cane, no chair, just her. Her balance was shaky, her steps uneven. But she was walking, breathing, present, not as a judge, not as a patient, but as a woman rediscovering what it meant to be alive in her own body. A few yards away, Sophie scattered breadcrumbs to the ducks, humming as she always did, her red jacket fluttering like a flag of childhood. Michael sat on the park bench, arms relaxed across the backrest, not watching them, like a soldier or a father who feared the world, but like someone finally remembering how to sit still without waiting for impact. The late afternoon light dipped into gold. Amelia turned from the water and walked toward them. Sophie saw her and grinned. "You're not even wobbling today," she said. Amelia chuckled. "Careful. That sounds dangerously close to a challenge." Michael stood brushing invisible lint off his coat. "She's right," he said. "You're getting stronger." "I'm getting something," she replied, taking a breath. "And for once, I'm not afraid to admit it." She turned to Sophie, lowering herself to one knee, still unsteady, still stiff, but her eyes locked with the little girl's. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day in court?" Sophie's brow furrowed. "Which part? The part that silenced a room full of adults." Sophie grinned. "I said if you let my dad go, I'd help you walk again." Amelia nodded. "You did. And I thought it was a fairy tale. But what I didn't realize was, I needed to believe it more than you needed to say it." Sophie leaned in and whispered, "Sometimes the small voices say the biggest things." Amelia blinked quickly and smiled. "You're wise beyond your years. You know that, I get it." "From Mommy," Sophie said. Then, after a pause, "And maybe from Daddy, too." Michael laughed. "I'll take the maybe." Amelia rose again, this time with ease. "I brought something," she said, reaching into her coat pocket. It was a phone. She tapped the screen. Music began to play. A soft waltz, gentle piano, slow strings. Nothing grand, nothing fast, just a rhythm that invited breath. Amelia held out her hand. "To both of you," she said. "But especially you, Sophie. For keeping a promise none of us had the courage to believe." Sophie curtsied in her own clumsy way, then took one hand. Michael hesitated. "I don't know how to dance." Amelia grinned. "Neither do I anymore. That's the point." And so beneath a sky dusted with the first stars of evening, the three of them began to move. No choreography, no audience, just motion. Sophie led her tiny feet, skipping, laughing every time Michael stepped the wrong way, or Amelia hesitated. Michael spun her in a slow circle, and her joy was so infectious, even the ducks seemed to linger closer. Amelia raised her arms, not in precision, but in celebration. Her legs trembled, but held. Her posture bent, but never broke. And in that moment, none of them were who the world had labeled not a convict. Not a crippled judge. Not a child caught between courtrooms and illness. They were three people dancing because they could, because they had survived, because love in the quietest form had carried them through. When the music ended, no one spoke right away. The silence was sacred. Then Sophie whispered, "That's the best recital ever." Michael kissed the top of her head. "You're the best teacher we've ever had." Amelia wiped a tear from her cheek. "I don't think I'll ever see a courtroom the same way again." Michael glanced sideways. "You still plan to go back?" "Not as before," she said. "Not to punish, but to protect, to listen, to remember that behind every file number is a human being who may just need one more chance." He nodded. "I know a few guys at the VFW who could use someone like that." She turned to him. "And I know a certain single dad who might make an incredible mentor." Michael chuckled. "Careful. That sounds dangerously close to a calling." They laughed together, not because everything was fixed, but because finally everything made sense. Later that night, as the sky deepened and the stars came out one by one, Sophie sat between them on the same park bench where Michael had once prayed in silence. This time, there were no prayers, only gratitude. She rested her head on her father's shoulder and looked up at Amelia. "Will we dance again?" Amelia nodded. "Every chance we get." And as the wind moved softly through the trees, no longer cold, but kind, they sat there. A soldier, a judge, a girl, three lives once broken, now braided together by something stronger than circumstance, something called redemption. 3 months later, the portrait was unveiled. It now hung in the front hallway of the Fairfax County Courthouse, just outside Courtroom 2B, a large canvas framed in oak mounted beneath a brass plate that read, "Judge Amelia Cross returned to the bench after miraculous recovery. March 12th. Justice is not always found in books. Sometimes it walks in with a child." The image captured her in profile, standing tall in her black robe, gavel in one hand, cane in the other. But it was her eyes that made people stop and stare. They were alive. Not with sternness, but with something warmer, a kind of quiet knowing, as though she saw more than the law now, as though she'd learned that judgment is best tempered with mercy, and that some of the strongest testimonies come from the smallest voices. Amelia stood beside the portrait, now dressed in her civilian clothes, light gray slacks, soft sweater, her hair down for once. No podium, no crowd, just a few reporters, some courthouse staff, and Michael and Sophie. She looked up at the painting, then at Sophie. "They didn't get my nose right," she said, smirking. Sophie tilted her head. "I think you look like a superhero," Michael chuckled. "Judges in capes. I'd vote for that." A local journalist stepped forward. "Judge Cross, many are calling this the miracle case of the year. Do you believe that's what it was? A miracle?" Amelia paused, then turned to face the room. "No," she said softly. "I believe it was something better." The reporters leaned in. She looked down at Sophie, then back up. "I believe it was a moment when truth and love and courage aligned. I believe that little girl didn't heal me with magic. She healed me by reminding me that hope is a muscle. And I had forgotten how to use mine." There was silence. "The good kind. I do believe in miracles," she added, "but not the kind that just happen. I believe in the kind we build together." She looked to Michael. "Justice is not only about what someone did, it's about why, and it's about what happens next." Michael smiled humbly. "What's happening next for Mr. Bray and his daughter?" another reporter asked. Amelia glanced at them both. "Well, Mr. Bray has officially completed his community service ahead of schedule. Turns out when you assign a Navy SEAL to serve others, they overachieve." Laughter rippled through the group. And as for Sophie, Amelia continued, "She's recently been appointed as my unofficial assistant judge in the park, where we issue very serious verdicts about duck behavior and the proper number of muffin crumbs to bring each week." Sophie giggled. "I still say Quackers steals on purpose." "You'll make a fine prosecutor someday," Amelia replied. Later that afternoon, the three of them walked through Maple Park again. The spring wind had returned, soft this time, filled with the scent of blooming magnolias and sun-warmed earth. Sophie skipped ahead, balancing along the edge of the walking path like a tightrope artist. Michael and Amelia walked side by side, matching pace. You ever think he asked how strange it is that all of this, all of us, started with one little sentence? Amelia nodded. "Free my dad, and I'll help you walk again." She smiled, and we all laughed. "Not all of us," Michael said. I didn't laugh. "You didn't have to," she replied. "You carried that belief in your silence. I just didn't know how to hear it yet." They stopped near the bench, the same bench Michael had once sat on with clenched fists and a racing heart. Now he sat relaxed, arms stretched behind his head. Sophie joined them with a stick in hand and began drawing hearts in the dirt. "Daddy." "Yeah, do you think miracles are real?" Michael looked at her, then at Amelia, then at the ducks. "Yes," he said. "I do." Sophie looked up, like real. Real. Not just in stories, Michael nodded slowly. "Miracles are real, sweetheart. But they're not always big and flashy. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they take time. And sometimes They come dressed as little girls in red dresses who say brave things in courtrooms. Sophie leaned against his shoulder, thoughtful, then whispered, "I'm glad I got to be one." Amelia turned to them both. "You didn't just witness a miracle, Sophie. You were one." As the sun began to dip behind the trees, the three of them stood in a line looking out across the pond. A breeze passed through, gentle and warm. Quackers gave a lonely honk. Michael chuckled. "Permission to approach the ducks." "Your Honor," Amelia smiled. "Granted." They walked together slowly, deliberately toward the water, not as strangers brought together by tragedy, but as something more lasting. Chosen family. Are miracles real? They are when love is louder than fear, and hope is braver than logic. Sometimes the miracle isn't what gets healed. Sometimes the miracle is who learns to believe again. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know where in the world you're joining us from. Feel free to share your city or country in the comments below. Your stories and voices truly matter here. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss the next tale of kindness, courage, and quiet miracles. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending this time with us. We're so grateful to have you here. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and take good care.